that will be fine. Good morning students. I am Dr. Abhishek Kumar Singh, Tutor, Physiology Department, NMCH Gaya, and today we are continuing with the topic of central nervous system, and today very important topic we are going to discuss, that will be thalamus. In thalamus we will be discussing the different very important nuclei of thalamus, where the thalamus is situated, the anatomical part of thalamus, the physiological part of thalamus, various connections of the different nuclei of thalamus, and then the most important, the functions of thalamus, and some applied part to that. So we'll start today with that. So, what is thalamus? It is an egg-shaped nuclear structure which is sitting obliquely atop of the brainstem. It's also called sensory relay station, and that forms one of the most important functions of thalamus. There are two thalami on each side. Following 5 nuclear masses have been found in thalamus. Before going to that, these two thalami are anteriorly separated by third ventricle and the quadragemina, which is present between the posterior part. You can see in the diagram, this is the third ventricle and this is quadragemina, which is present between the two parts. Here it is there. So, and this is hypothalamus. This is the bridge which connects the two halves of the thalamus. Thalamus also forms the wall of the third ventricular cavity. Now, following 5 nuclear masses have been found in thalamus: medial nuclear mass, lateral nuclear mass, midline nuclei, intralamellar nuclei, and pulvinar nuclei. Again, we see here the cross section where you can see one half of the thalamus. This is the thalamus. This is the quadragemina we were talking about, and this is the third ventricle. This is lateral ventricle. This is the third ventricle. So the thalamus forms the wall of the third ventricle, and then there are various connections to that. We'll be talking in coming slides. These are the nuclei of thalamus. We'll talk about each of these nuclei in detail, and we'll come to this diagram again. Thalamic nuclei. This is the Y-shaped internal medullary laminae which splits the thalamus in 3 parts: anterior part, the lateral part, and the medial part. The medial nuclear mass consists of 2 distinct cell groups: the anterior nucleus and medial dorsal nucleus. We have this yellow thing, the anterior nucleus, and the second one was the medial dorsal nucleus. So there is medial dorsal nucleus. This is the anterior one, and then we have the medial dorsal. Then the lateral nuclear mass, which consists of 2 cell groups: the dorsal group of thalamus, also called as lateral nuclei, which consists of dorsal nucleus, lateral posterior nucleus, and pulvinar. And then the ventral group of thalamus, which has 3 portions: the ventral anterior nucleus, ventral lateral nucleus, and ventral posterior nucleus. You can see here the medial nucleus, the lateral posterior, the ventral posterior nucleus, the ventral lateral nucleus, the ventral anterior nucleus, and the anterior nucleus you can see here. And this is the pulvinar nucleus. So the lateral nuclear mass has a dorsal group of thalamus and a ventral group of thalamus. The dorsal group further consists of dorsal nucleus, lateral posterior nucleus and pulvinar, and ventral group of thalamus consists of ventral anterior nucleus, ventral lateral nucleus and ventral posterior nucleus. The ventral posterior nucleus has two cell groups, ventral posterolateral, which is also called VPL, and ventro-posteromedial, that is VPM. You will see these names coming again and again when we are going to see the connections, and in the coming chapters of CNS as well. The ventro-posterolateral nucleus and ventral posteromedial nucleus, which are the parts of ventral posterior nucleus. Then we come to the connections. Before going into connections, we need to know there are two things: medial geniculate body, you see here, medial geniculate body and the lateral geniculate bodies. These two are included as a part of thalamus, and these nuclei are known as metathalamus. So if somebody asks what is metathalamus, it is composed of medial geniculate nucleus and lateral geniculate nucleus, and we'll know about their function as we read further. And then there is epithalamus. What is epithalamus? It has a connection with the olfactory system of your body. Example, the pineal body and the havenular complex. What are havenular complex? They are pair of small nuclei present above the thalamus in the posterior part. So metathalamus and epithalamus, two terms you came to know. Then we come to connections. In connections, first for anterior nuclear group, all connections are divided in afferent and efferent. First, in anterior nuclear group, we have anterior nucleus, and afferent to that is mammillary bodies, and they are connected through mammillothalamic tract, and efferent to paracentral lobules, posterior part of singular gyri. You will come to know about these terms as we go more in details of parts of CNS in the coming chapters. Then we have medial nuclear group. Medial nuclear group is composed of medial dorsal nucleus, which consists of ventral nuclear group, and this medial dorsal nucleus has an afferent to prefrontal area of cerebral cortex and also to hypothalamus. We are talking about medial dorsal nucleus, which has an afferent to prefrontal area of cerebral cortex and hypothalamus, and it has an efferent again to hypothalamus as well as corpus striatum and prefrontal cortex. Then we have ventral nuclear group. This ventral nuclear group has ventral anterior nucleus and ventral lateral nucleus. The ventral anterior nucleus has afferent to globus pallidus, that is a part of basal ganglia, and efferent to different areas of corpus striatum. And then the ventral lateral nucleus has an afferent to globus pallidus and dentate nucleus of cerebellum of the opposite side. We'll see that when we talk about cerebellum in coming classes. Then it also has afferent to ipsilateral red nucleus forming rubrothalamic tract. Then it has efferent to precentral area of cerebral cortex called area 4. This was the afferent and efferent of ventral lateral nucleus. Then we have ventral posterior nuclei. Ventral posterior nuclei has ventral posteromedial, that is VPM nucleus, and ventral posterolateral nucleus, that is VPL nucleus. The afferent to ventral posteromedial nucleus is to cross fibers from the spinal and superior sensory trigeminal nuclei ascending in association with the medial lemniscus, and also has afferent to crossed dorsal trigeminal tract, while efferent to the ventral posterior nuclei, that is ventral posteromedial nucleus, is to post-central gyrus. So afferent was to the uncrossed dorsal trigeminal tract and to cross fibers from the spinal and superior sensory trigeminal nuclei, which is ascending in association with the medial lemniscus, and efferent is to the post-central gyrus. Then we have ventral posterolateral nucleus. which has an afferent to medial and spinal lemnisci and efferent to post-central gyrus. Then we have lateral nucleus group that includes lateral dorsal nucleus, which has an afferent to precentral cortex and efferent to precudial cortex, while lateral posterior nucleus has afferent to superior parietal lobule, that is area 5 and 7, and efferent to superior parietal lobule itself. And then we have pulvinar nuclei, which has got connections with the metathalamus and medial dorsal nucleus. Then we have the midline nuclei, which is found in the massa intermedia, has an afferent to corpus striatum and brainstem reticular formation, and efferent to cerebral cortex, red nucleus, midbrain nuclei, and hypothalamus. These are various afferent and efferent connections of various thalamic nuclei about which we are talking right now. Then we have intralaminar nuclear groups. These intralaminar nuclear group has afferent to medial and trigeminal lemnisci as well as reticular formation of brainstem, and efferent to globus pallidus and other thalamic nuclei. These terms may be unknown to you, but as you will read further chapters in CNS, and all these are interconnected to each other, the whole of the CNS and their parts, then you will come to know about these parts better, and then it will be easier for you to remember these afferent-efferent connections. Then metathalamus or the metathalamic nuclei. We talked about metathalamus, which consisted of two nuclei, the medial geniculate body and the lateral geniculate bodies. We already have studied the sensory system, and you have known or heard these two nuclei, the medial geniculate body or the medial geniculate nucleus and the lateral geniculate nucleus. The medial geniculate body has an afferent to the ascending auditory fibers originating from the trapezoid nuclei, as well as superior olivary nuclei, lateral lemniscus and inferior colliculus. So it is involved in the auditory pathway. This medial geniculate body nucleus, medial geniculate nucleus, and it has an efferent to auditory cortex and fibers to the nucleus of lateral lemniscus, as well as to the superior olivary nucleus. And then we have lateral geniculate body having lateral geniculate nuclei. Afferent is to the end station of optic tract. So the lateral geniculate body is involved in the visual pathway. Afferent are to end station of the optic tract, and efferent is to the visual cortex, and also send fibers to the caliparine cortex, superior colliculi, as well as prefrontal, prepectal areas. So main two things you have to remember in metathalamic nuclei is that the medial geniculate body involved in the auditory pathways has an efferent to that, efferent and afferent to that, while the lateral geniculate bodies had an afferent and efferent involved in the visual pathway. The afferent is to the optic tract and the efferent is to the visual cortex. This was all about various connection of the thalamic nuclei. Then comes very important question for examination point of view. You get short notes, you can even get describe various thalamic nuclei, name them, draw a well-labeled diagram, and then you have to describe the functions of thalamus. This can come as a whole one long question, or you can just get functions of thalamus as a short notes. So first and most important function is that it is a relay station. What all it relays? First, it has a relay that is for pathways coming from cerebellum, cerebral cortex, and projecting from the peripheral sensory systems. It is a relay station for auditory and visual stimuli. We have seen that include medial geniculate body and the lateral geniculate body, and then the ventrolateral nucleus receives cerebellar impulses and relay them to area 4 and 6 of the frontal lobe. Through this, cerebellum guides and controls function of cerebrum. Then it also receives somesthetic sensations from the opposite half of the body. It is connected also with the limbic lobes and hypothalamus, and by its anterior nucleus it plays an important role in autonomic, emotional and behavioral responses. When you will see or study the limbic system, you will again see these functions coming there and how hypothalamus is useful there itself. So these all it relays and it controls functions of cerebrum also, and through cerebellum also it has connections and it is controlling the functions. It has connection with the limbic lobes as well as hypothalamus, and through that it also controls the autonomic, emotional and behavioral responses, and also somesthetic sensations from the opposite half of the body. So here this thalamus acts as a relay centers for all this. Then second important function is that it has a very important role in sleep and wakefulness and is an integrative center for sleep. When we talk in very much detail as a separate chapter, sleep and RAS system, we'll again see this function of thalamus, that it has a role in sleep and wakefulness. Then third function is the conscious and alertness response is maintained by thalamus. The reticular nucleus, which plays a very important role in arousal and alerting reaction, making a person alert, making a person conscious. In that, it plays an important role. Then fourth, it is responsible for subcortical perception of sensation. Fifth, overall muscular movements are controlled by thalamus through its connection to cerebellum and basal ganglia. Sixth, it plays a very important role in recapping the memory. When we talk about memory in detail, we'll see this again. Then fifth, sixth, seventh, it has a role in emotional reactions such as rage is mediated by thalamus. We'll again talk about emotion, rage, motivation and all these behaviors when we talk in limbic system. So you will know more in details when we talk about limbic system and emotion. Then it also helps in language and speech by integrating 10 cortical and subcortical inputs. So these all were the important functions of thalamus. They are related to different functions of brain, as this is one of the most important, integrating those functions. So it helps in muscular movement, in memory, in emotional reactions, in language and speech, in sleep wakefulness, relay centers for various sensations, as well as in various perception of sensation at the subcortical level. Then coming to the applied physiology. What is thalamic pain syndrome, also called as Dejerine-Roussy syndrome? It develops after a thalamic stroke. It's a very rare neurological condition in which stroke to the part of the human brain which controls sensation, that is thalamus, results in excessive pain in response to reduced sensation or even mild stimulation. You understand this? This is what is happening in this thalamic pain syndrome. What happens here? The symptoms are abnormal sensation of cold on one side of the body, abnormal sensation of heat on one side of the body. There is chorioathetoid movements. There are cramps and muscular spasms and emotional overreactions. Why all this is happening? Why? Because light touch, tactile discrimination and localizations are lost, but the crude touch and pressure etc. can be felt. Astereognosis. and sensory ataxia is present. Any difference of temperature between 24 degrees Celsius to 38 degrees Celsius cannot be felt. That's why there is abnormal sensation of cold or abnormal sensation of heat. Then there is emotional aspect of sensations are heightened. That is, even a slight painful stimuli can cause excessive pain. This is due to this hemorrhage, due to this stroke in this area of thalamus, in thalamus. Then there is abnormal involuntary movement, which is called as chorioathetoid movements. Here there is intentional tremors and chorioathetosis, which are the features of thalamic lesions. Then, other than thalamic pain syndrome or Dejerine-Roussy syndrome, we have Brown's disease. Brown's disease is a disease which results from degeneration of thalamus, which occurs leading to fatal familial insomnia. What happens? Patients do not get any sleep, and this can lead to death. Then there can be damage to thalamus, which can make a person go into a comatose state for a very long time. So these all are the applied aspect of thalamus, where if a thalamus gets diseased either due to stroke or due to degeneration or due to damage, these all are the consequences which can happen. So that's all about today's topic of thalamus, its connection, its location. You have to know the names of all the nuclei of the thalamus, which comes usually as short notes or a long question with a good diagram representing those nuclei, and you have to see that how these nuclei have afferent and efferent connections through which the functions of thalamus are performed. Thank you. In the next class, we'll start with the motor system. Thank you.